Tabernacle, Brother Shell here. This is Wednesday of Holy Week, and I wanted to share with you our devotion for this beautiful Wednesday. This is from John's Gospel, chapter 13. This is now during the Last Supper, and Jesus realizes that the time is almost at hand, and he releases Judas to go and do what he has to do. Let me read this for you. This is John chapter 13, and we'll begin reading in verse 21. And when Jesus had said this, he became troubled in spirit, and testified and said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, that one of you will betray me." The disciples began to look at one another, at a loss as to know of which one he was speaking. And there was reclining on Jesus' bosom one of his disciples, whom Jesus loved. So Simon Peter gestured to him and said to him, "Tell him to tell us who is speaking of." He leaned back on Jesus' bosom and said, "Lord, who is it?" Then Jesus answered, "It's the one to whom I dip the morsel and give it to him." So when Jesus had dipped the morsel, he took and gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. And after the morsel, Satan entered him. Therefore Jesus said to him, "What you do, do quickly." And now no one who was reclining at the table knew for what purpose he had said this to him. For some were supposing, because Judas had the money box, that Jesus was saying to him, "Buy some things that we need for the feast," or else that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel, he went out immediately, and it was night. So this betrayal of Judas, I think, has several facets to it, and people over the ages have vacillated on Judas's motivation and his character, and I tend to take a somewhat sympathetic view. I think Judas thought that somehow betraying Christ would sort of force his hand, that he would flush him out, and that he would become the Messiah that they all wanted him to be. John clearly portrays to us that this was the work of Satan. Whether Judas realized that he was under the influence of Satan, I think, is a whole nother question. There's no doubt that Judas is an instrument of the devil here to try to bring about the destruction of the kingdom of God and the destruction of God's plan. A couple of things I want to point out here is that, first of all, when Jesus said, "One of you is going to betray me," they all looked at each other and they had no idea who it was. And they didn't even know how to decide. In the other Gospels, at this revelation, they began asking one another, asking Jesus, "Is it I? Is it I?" So that it wasn't like Judas was this wolf in sheep's clothing all along, that they all knew there's something about that guy. He never was really one of us. There's no doubt that Judas was fully integrated into the disciples. He simply got misled and let the devil tempt him into trying to do his own will instead of the Lord's. And in that respect, we all can be Judases. Every single one of us, at some point or another, maybe even weekly or daily, find an excuse to do what we want to do instead of seeking the Lord's will. And it's certainly true that any one of us is able to fall, to be tempted, to be led away. I think as soon as we sort of think that we're invincible and we think that there's no way that could happen to us, that's probably when we're at the most susceptible to being led by Satan. I stumbled on a reading by Dorothy Sayers. I never heard of her before. Turns out she was a British detective writer back in the turn of the century up till the 1930s. She was very influential, apparently, in developing that whole sort of gumshoe amateur detective genre, and wrote a lot of novels and has several very famous characters. And then around the 1930s, she stopped writing mystery novels and began writing Christian plays and essays, and also translating the entire works of Dante's Inferno. And in one of her articles, which is called The Triumph of Easter, she was talking about Jesus dying for our sin. And she says, when Judas sinned, Jesus paid. He brought good out of evil. He led triumph from the gates of hell and brought all of mankind out with him. But the suffering of Jesus and the sin of Judas remained a reality. God did not abolish the fact of evil. He transformed it. He did not stop the crucifixion. He rose from the dead. Judas committed the final and fatal and most pitiful error of all. For he despaired of God and himself and never waited to see the resurrection. He saw the dreadful payment made, but he never knew the victory that had been purchased with that price. The Lord, turn our back on him and be like Judas. But we need to hang on so that we can enjoy the resurrection and the wonderful freedom that was purchased with that price.